Hello and welcome to the Empower Nutrition Podcast. And I'm just so thrilled today to have someone who I've admired for many years on the podcast. Welcome, Dr. Cate.
Thank you for inviting me onto your show, Erin. This is exciting to be here with you.
Oh my gosh, it's so exciting. I mean, I already could ask you 1,000 things, but just before I start asking you all the questions I've dreamed, maybe you could just give me a little background of how you as a physician got so into the nutrition space, which is uncommon, and then specifically maybe a little bit your focus around ancestral nutrition.
Yeah, so I started actually because of biochemistry, right? Our food is made out of molecules, and biochemistry is the science that studies that. Before I went to medical school, I really wanted to be a biochemist. I really wanted to design bacteria that could digest plastic, right?
Cool.
So I wanted to be on the good side of GMOs, right? That's what it was going to be. And that was at Cornell University. I learned a lot about biochemistry. I learned a lot about genetics. And I learned that it's very complicated. So that we were not going to be likely able to do that in my span of interest. My attention span was within a decade. It wasn't long. That was too long. So I quit and I went to medical school, and I was hoping in medical school that I would learn the underlying cause of my own, selfishly, my own health problems, which were recurring sports issues, tendonitis, hip pain, bursitis, stuff like this. Why me? And I thought that I would learn that, but I didn't. So by the time I graduated as a family medicine physician, I was a little bit sad with the state of medicine already, because I was just passing out pills. Like half of my day was kind of the more fun medicine stuff, like, oh, I have this issue, what is it? Diagnostic thinking processes, helping solve problems. But a good part of the other half was just repetitively people coming in for blood pressure, cholesterol, abnormal chronic things, and just needing refills, really. And also a lot of it, the worst was the blood pressure, I felt like, and the cholesterol, because people would almost come in apologizing. Like I felt more like a priest than a doctor. Like, oh, I'm sorry, I've sinned. I've not been taking pills. My blood pressure is still high or something like that, And that wasn't fun. That was not fun. I didn't want to be like in a position of like, not really doing anything meaningful. Obviously, they didn't feel that they were helping. They weren't taking them. So I was sad, and eventually I got even sadder because I developed an injury and I couldn't run at all. Like I have the worst of the worst of all the injuries. I couldn't run, I couldn't bike. All I could do was swim. Thank goodness I lived in Hawaii. There was plenty of places to swim. And I wasn't getting better. I had surgery. It was a medical mystery. And Erin, I hope you never know or are a person with a medical mystery. It totally sucks. But what it did was it forced. I mean, nobody could tell me what was wrong, but something was seriously wrong because I couldn't really walk without getting fevers. It was bizarre.
That's weird.
Yeah. So my husband said, well, maybe your diet isn't so great. Like after all, you eat like an army of ants. Speaking of the amount of sugar I used to eat. And he introduced me to a book that was called Spontaneous Healing. It was kind of an alternative medicine guru who wrote that back in the 1990s, Andrew Weil. Maybe some of your audience has heard of him.
Yes, I think so. Wow.
Yeah. He basically started like the nutritional supplement industry single-handedly, basically, in the 80s. So his book, though, opened my eyes to this concept of essential fatty acids, which were interesting to me, partly because it was a biochemistry term, and partly because I thought they might be important to help me get better. But shortly after studying these things, I realized that these are the fatty acids in vegetable oils. I was already eating a lot of them. And then I started looking at their biochemistry. And I found that their biochemistry is absolutely horrible in terms of human health and in terms of the amount that we were consuming and in terms of using to cook with. We were using vegetable oils, to cook with. We still are. And they're in ingredients. They're ingredients in cooked food. They're in restaurants. They're everywhere, vegetable oils. And when I say vegetable oils, I'm talking about soy and corn and cottonseed and canola, not olive oil. That is a vegetable oil, but it's not the bad kind. So when I say vegetable oil, I'm referring to a collection of 8. I call them hateful 8. And these are all terrifically bad for us. And they're bad for us because of their chemistry. And there's just absolutely no way I would have understood this concept about how these things are bad for us because of their chemistry had I not been basically a biochemist for years before going to medical school. Because it's really an abstract concept, and you kind of have to be able to recognize molecules on site. If somebody draws them on a chalkboard, you have to be able to draw out reactions. I couldn't have done it without background, but with that background, I very quickly realized these things were probably making me sick, and these vegetable oils were probably making a lot of my patients sick, and they were probably causing a lot of the problems that I was not really able to solve with drugs like hypertension and chronic cardiovascular disease and all kinds of things, because they promote inflammation. And inflammation is quite a buzzword today. Wasn't back then. This was in the early 2000s, but I did know that I was treating people for inflammatory diseases, because I was using anti-inflammatories. I was treating arthritis with anti-inflammatories. I was treating serious autoimmune disorders with prednisone and steroids, which are anti-inflammatories. So understanding the link between these chemicals and inflammation really opened my eyes to the possibility that just getting these things out of our diet might really be revolutionary for a lot of people's health. So that was kind of like the first phase of many of my revolution in thinking and understanding of nutrition.
Yeah. Wow. That's so interesting, because I also spend a lot of time trying to reduce high omega-6 vegetable oils with my clients and through my programs. And I find that people, when you first say it, they say, oh, I don't really eat a lot of that, because it's not really on the label. It's not like, hey, here's your coffee creamer with lots of canola oil in it. But when they start looking at labels, they're everywhere. And so I totally agree with you that people are getting a lot of this. And when then we take them out of their diet, they tend to have pretty dramatic health changes around anything inflammation related, whether it's known to be that inflammation initiates it, or even where I find it's more the thinking is that the condition maybe causes inflammation. I feel like it even can benefit in those cases. But what I have had happen though is pushback in terms of the science is very clear. Saturated fat causes heart disease. Vegetable oils make you healthy. So I'm curious if you kind of you could probably talk about that for hours, but do you kind of have a response to that question around the body of nutritional research and how it reconciles with that thinking about vegetable oils?
Yes, because this was my next question. So once I came to realize that, these things can cause oxidative stress, and that causes inflammation, that causes everything, then I started to look at, why does everyone think saturated fat is bad? What is the support for that? What does that theory stand on solid ground? And so my next phase of research was to dive into that question. And I found two fascinating things. One was that it was a complete house of cards. The supposed research, the supposed support for the cholesterol theory of heart disease, right? So saturated fat is bad because it raises your cholesterol. Cholesterol is bad because it clogs your arteries. And all of this comes from 1940s, 1950s. A single man with an idea. And I write about this in my first book, Deep Nutrition. His name is Ansel Keys, and he had very loose scruples and very not good ethics in terms of, he really just wanted attention. He wanted
yeah, it's a good way of summarizing him.
Yeah, he wanted to be right. He wanted to get credit for coming up with the idea, with being the person that solved the mystery of heart attacks, which, and they were a terrifying mystery in the 40s and 50s, because people had just started recently developing these and dropping dead from them. And so it was a new thing. And that may seem strange. How could it be that people didn't have heart attacks before like the 1940s and 50s, or like they were rare. How could that be? Well, yeah, how could that be? So what turns out, we now know that it's not cholesterol clogging our arteries. It's nothing like that. It's not fat building up in our arteries like grease in a pipe, which is what Ansel Keys claimed. And all of his research claimed that, although it was terrifically bad research. Like, he doesn't do anything systematically research-wise. Look at his papers. They're just more editorials than anything else. And his data supposedly supporting his position is just random musings on things. It's really laughable, but if it would be laughable if it were the outcome has been, we all are eating toxic seed oils now. So anyway, that was like the first thing, was like, okay, so this had nothing, no support. And then the next question was, well, all right, so why? Why not? Why in the 40s did people start having heart attacks? Was it that they were eating more fat? Was it that they were eating more animal fat? Was it something else? And so when I did that, I ran into this whole body of fascinating research, which I think you've been in. You mentioned that you're like the ancestral health movement, right?
Yeah.
With Weston Price, who's kind of like the star. I see him like the star of that.
Totally.
So he went around to 11 countries and wrote this big book about his findings. And people were eating animal fat exclusively. They were not, almost exclusively, I mean, they were not eating the vegetable oil. And in fact, when they did eat the stuff that was in the convenience stores, the flour, the sugar, and the hydrogenated oils, and sometimes the vegetable oils, and the canned meats and the preserves and all the sugary stuff, he found that consistently their health would deteriorate, and they would not be these stellar examples of glowing human health that the people who avoided all that stuff and just stuck with their ancestral health wisdom and eating practices, that made them super duper healthy. Not, it wasn't just that they weren't fat and they didn't have diabetes and they didn't have heart attacks. They were vibrant in their 80s, and their children were like well-behaved and intelligent. And it was amazing. It was like being different. He paints it like being immersed in an alien planet almost, where humanity is just like cooperative. And can you imagine that these days we're so infighting and it's terrible? And he really attributed a lot of the society problems at that time that we were having to poor nutrition and just poor mental health that came from poor nutrition. And I thought that was a bit of a leap, but I thought it was interesting. And so I just kept diving deeper into the research and found out that he was right. And we should be paying attention. We should be eating the foods that our ancestors ate. We should be studying ancestral nutrition. We should not be studying, the standard dietitian diet, the standard diet that doctors recommend. We've got some work. Right. Yeah. Burn. I send people to dietitians. Standard diet, right?
Yeah.
So wow, it's also topsy-turvy. And but it doesn't have to be. We can just forget about the last 50 years of garbage nutrition science and go back to the basics and our ancestral wisdom, ancestral health, old-fashioned cookbooks, Julia Child's way of thinking, and people that love to cook, because when you love to cook, you think like a nutritionist. And like that's one of the things that I liked being able to say in Deep Nutrition was really the original nutritionists are people who like to cook, because they created our human diet. They created the foods that, like, they did the things that are the things that made us who we are.
Yeah. It sounds so simple, but when you're talking, I keep thinking about the way that gets misconstrued, in the sense of, I think you could find people that would argue that the natural human diet, even to ancestral times, is mostly, if not all, vegetarian or vegan. And then on the other side of the coin, you now have, I think, a more prevalent movement around, oh, it's only animals and it's just a carnivore diet. So I'm curious what you would say is like, what is the natural human diet?
Well, there's a lot of them, right? Obviously, we've done pretty well with ourselves until something changed. In the 1940s and 50s, we were
Yeah.
seeing this change in the form of a
Mhm.
lot of young men in their 40s and 50s dropping dead from heart attacks. That was kind of the beginning of the wake-up call. And it just got worse. So what was causing those heart attacks then? We have to look at that. Like, it's very simple. And what was happening then was, were we eating more saturated fat? Were we eating more animal products? Were
Mhm.
we eating more vegetables? Even
Right.
taking points from all the sides that you mentioned.
Mhm.
The carnivores say vegetables are killing us.
Yeah. And the vegans
The
say the animals are killing us.
animals are killing us. And then a whole bunch of people are saying, well, we just need to eat mostly plants, right? That's the Mediterranean concept. Um, and so, but what happened in the 1950s was we started two things that brought on heart attacks. One was that all the GIs came back from World War II fully hooked on nicotine cigarettes, right?
Okay.
That was part of every ration, every meal. They got at least 4 cigarettes. So they came back smoking like chimneys. Like, you think people chain smoke today? People would chain smoke. President Eisenhower was a 4-pack a day smoker on a good day.
Wow. I didn't
Yeah.
even know there was time for that. Like from waking to sleeping.
It's just constantly every time you inhale. Has to be, right?
I think so.
You got to be dedicated. So yeah, so that was a big factor. And then the other factor was, well, they had just been through this starvation period in the Depression, where very few people ate meat. There was mostly,
Mhm.
a lot of very borderline nutrition, very
Yeah.
poor access to vitamins, and they were not eating, though, more meat, but they also were starting to eat more vegetable oils
Mhm.
in the 50s. So all these things happened at once. So, I mean, if you just look at the facts, the simple facts, I don't see how anybody could argue that, no, it was meat that killed people, started killing people, because we have the same problems, right? We have the same problems now that we did in the 40s and 50s. It's just they're worse, they're magnified, right? Cancer
Yeah.
was becoming more problem, diabetes, type 2 diabetes was becoming prevalent. People were starting to gain weight in droves. That was not an issue, in the 20s. You
Mhm.
can't really count the 30s because it was such a time of deprivation and starvation and so much social unrest and strife, and it was horrible. But so going back to the 20s, that people were in shape, and and they didn't even know anything about macros, right? They just ate
Yeah.
what their families had eaten.
Of course.
So, that's what I say is like, yeah, look, guys, that, people probably were really healthy back 20, 30,000 years ago, when the earth was radically different and
Mhm.
we hunted everything. Who knows what we really ate. We do find spears. We do find, going back 20,000 years, we see a lot of evidence actually in China of people eating all sorts of plant seeds that became wheat, like the wild forms of wheat, 20,000 years ago, in civilizations that were considered to be hunter-gatherers. So that kind of puts a big giant question mark on this claim that we
Didn't have
even like,
grains.
yeah, like,
Mhm.
maybe, who knows, right? Like, we don't know. It's a big black box. So so that's that down. And then the point that we ever only ate plants is absurd. I mean, there's no culture that has gone 3 generations that I know of, that has excluded meat for 3 generations and survived, right? You just don't have that. We have
Yeah.
we have vegetarianism in India, but that's different than
Yeah.
veganism.
Completely
And
different.
yeah, and they eat the dairy, they eat the cattle products, the cow products. They don't eat the meat, but they eat eggs. And very often, I've spoken to people from India who said they were vegetarian, but they eat chicken. Because
Yeah.
by vegetarian, they mean they won't eat beef, really,
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes. Yeah.
right? Like, it's
Sometimes.
just all this flux of
But
what.
in either case, they've got B12, they've got choline. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
got
I mean,
iron.
you can get
Like
absolutely
real
everything.
iron.
You can get absolutely
Yeah.
everything. So there's
Yeah.
4 strategies that I write about in Deep Nutrition. I don't know if you read the 4 pillars of world cuisine part of Deep Nutrition,
Hmm.
but I can talk about those.
Go ahead. Yeah, because I don't think the listeners all have. Right? So please.
Yeah. So there's 4 strategies every single successful traditional human culture follows. And this is to eat fresh food, whether animal or vegetable, doesn't matter. We don't cook it. And to eat, so people used to eat, so there was always dairy. If you ate dairy, of course, it wasn't pasteurized. How are you going to do that on the
Raw
steppes of
dairy is the
Asia?
dairy. Yeah.
Right. So the unprocessed, uncooked stuff, animals, all kinds of stuff. So that's raw. And then the second pillar is a strategy of nourishing our bodies, fermenting some of the raw stuff or sprouting some of the seeds to optimize the nutrition and make it easier for our bodies to digest it and create this whole swarm of good bacteria that will then fortify the microbiome when we eat it, like kimchi and sauerkraut and ketchup used to be fermented. Like so many of our condiments
Yeah.
were fermented and had live culture bacteria, not just yogurt, which is like the only thing that people get now that has any live culture in it these days.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sprouted being the sprouted grain. So no doubt back if, people were eating grains 20,000 years ago, they did not have like technology of turning it into flour. If they weren't going to do that, if they didn't have to. So you can sprout things that softens the seed, and then you can kind of just mash it and mush it up a lot easier. And so sprouting creates more nutrition. So that's an important strategy, that second one. And you can do that when you're a vegetarian. You can even do that. You cannot do that one when you're a carnivore unless you're eating the internal contents of intestines, which people in Alaska, they did do that. So
So fascinating.
yeah. So that's 2 of them. And then the third pillar, that was a strategy everybody did, is I call it meat on the bone, because they didn't just eat the muscle, they used the bones, they saved the bones, in fact. And very, very important was to boil the bones and the skin and the connective tissue to create a gelatinous broth that they would then use to make their soup. And if you do that, then you don't get these collagen supporting molecules that don't exist anywhere else in the food supply.
Yeah.
So, if you don't want to take a collagen supplement, if it's not helping you, even better is to do bone broth.
Yeah.
That's meat on the bone. So, and of course it includes the meat.
Yeah.
And the fat. And then the last is the most dramatic one that like people usually like drop their coffee at this point. Organ meats like liver and tripe and some of those, raw intestines that people in Alaska used to eat.
Yeah.
The thing we don't even have, you can't even get them in most restaurants. Most people don't know how to cook them. People think they're unsafe to eat, like liver. They think it's unsafe to eat. Even eyeballs. I mean, it's just people ate every last part, and they loved it. When I lived in Hawaii, I got my eyes opened about what like ancestral eating really was, because where I lived, there was a huge Filipino community. And the Filipino community was almost completely, fully food self-sufficient. So they fished, they hunted, they grew their own food, and they did all of these practices. But they would use blood. They would eat raw pig liver. They would use like goat legs and goat head and every part of the animal. It was something that when we hear people talking about people eating like the awful meats is what we call them now, we usually hear it in the context of, well, they were poor, they didn't have a choice. But what I learned from living among people who were doing this was that it was celebrated. It was their culture. They were proud of it. They loved it. You couldn't take it
They
away.
would give it to women when they're like pregnant, postpartum, like as a special thing. Yeah. It's not like, oh, we have to eat these dregs. It was like a prize piece. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And they would, at the parties, they would be like, here, like try our stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're proud of it.
Yeah.
So living in Hawaii really gave me a leg up, I think, it was almost like a window into the past of what people used to do. traditionally, because it really
Yeah.
made it real for me. I mean, it's one thing to read old cookbooks or watch Anthony Bourdain travel around the world and eat, random people's, wherever
He's
Anthony
such a
Bourdain,
hero.
yeah, wherever he went, like he would go.
Yeah.
I would watch this show called No Reservations, and every single episode there was somebody who would spend all day cooking some little mamacita or something, and
Mm.
everything on that table was one of the 4 pillars. It was the
Yeah.
broth, it was organ meats, it was the fermented stuff, it was sprouted, it was fresh, it was amazing. And but like it was happening in my neighborhood too. So that made it real, and it really helped me believe it. And I was able to try it and made a lot of friends because people were so impressed that I was trying
Yeah.
to make it myself. So it was quite the experience. And in doing that, ultimately, a couple of years, after I fell ill, I got completely better, and I was able
Yeah.
to do all the exercise and activity, and I was like better than ever. So
Yeah.
it was really powerful for me. And of course,
Mhm.
I shared it with my patients also.
Yeah. I had a similar experience. I mean, it wasn't extreme as yours, but yeah, dramatic health turnaround when I switched to ancestral diet. And that was really the reason why I wasn't even working in healthcare when that happened. I have to change careers. I mean, it's so powerful. And
Oh,
it's kind of amazing to me that it just seems so obvious, and yet there's constantly pushback on these ideas. And but what I like about what you've done is you haven't just said, "Hey, look, there's traditional groups that don't eat vegetable oil." You've done deep research on the specific mechanisms and in light of your biochemistry background and your abilities. And so I'd love to hear more about maybe your just top level thoughts on like when it comes to what not maybe the only problem with modern diets, but one of the least understood or least known problems with modern diets that is the omega-6 vegetable oils. What would you say are the primary mechanisms for that? I know you've alluded to oxidative stress, but maybe you can get into a little bit more detail around that in terms of like the specific way that these vegetable oils that are hiding in almost everything that people eat and drink, like how are they specifically promoting health problems, and what are some of the biggest problems that they cause?
yeah. So let's talk about the vegetable oils, and let's talk about this omega-6 concept too first, because that was a theory that was developed in the 1990s that too much omega-6, because omega-6 is a pro-inflammatory essential fatty acid, would imbalance us and cause inflammation. And that was an idea that was proposed by a journalist in the form of a book, and it became wildly popular, and everybody started eating omega-3 supplements to balance things out.
Mhm.
But the book got way ahead of the science. And then later on, the scientist half of that book team, Artemis Simopoulos, did some studies, and she said, no, that, it's not really, no, it doesn't really
It's
work
not
out
playing
that way.
out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not the problem. There's some other problem. Like she knew that we're eating more of these vegetable oils, and she was from Greece, Artemis Simopoulos, pretty Greek.
Yeah.
So she knew they were chemically different than olive oil, and she thought maybe that it had something to do with the omega-6s. But when it was finally tested, she was like, no, that's not it. We need more research. So researchers love that line. You
Yeah.
need more of me.
Always.
But what I concluded was, hey guys, it's not the omega-6 to 3 ratio. It's this concept of oxidative stress, because that is unique to these vegetable oils. And just to point out why it can't possibly be the omega-3 6 ratio, just one simple example is canola oil has a lot of omega-3, and that's every bit as toxic and contains all the toxins. When you cook with it, it will generate all the toxins that soy oil and corn oil does. So it's not about the ratio and the omega-6 linoleic acid. I keep hearing people talking about this, and it's like, I think they really need to understand that where that idea came from, to understand that it was an idea and it kind of had its day and it's been disproven. but there's still this question. So why is it that these oils seem to be bad? If you just look at the demographics of it, we're eating more, blah, blah, blah. What are they? How are they bad? And the answer is oxidative stress. And that is my answer. And I think it's very important for people to know the root of these ideas. Like, this comes from Dr. Cate Shanahan, because not just because I get to say what a good girl am I, but which is nice, but I don't want to have to do that. I think it's important to know where a scientific idea comes from, so that you can make sure you're getting it right. And if it ever turns out to be wrong, then you can put it to rest. Right?
Yeah.
And also, we're not getting it right now. Right now, people are getting it all mixed up with the fact that omega-6 is inflammatory, and people are hearing me talk about how these oils promote inflammation, and they just don't understand the oxidative stress part, because it's confusing. You have to kind of be a chemist to understand it. And so they just like, well, other people are saying omega-6, and I'm going to hang on to that one. But that is not the issue. And it makes it too easy for the powers that be that want us to keep eating these things to shut it all down.
Yeah, to argue it. Totally. So you're saying there's something else in these vegetable seed oils that's pro-oxidative, that's not the omega-6 fat.
Well, it is the omega-6 fat, but the omega-6 is less pro-oxidative than the omega-3s. So we can't say it's omega-6 when omega-3 is actually worse. And it's not like, inflammation comes from a variety of things, but the body's inflammatory response is different than the kind of inflammation that is caused by oxidative stress. And the problems that oxidative stress cause are much worse than the body's inflammatory response. So the body's inflammatory response is responsible for good things, like clotting our blood, like so we don't bleed to death during every month when we have a period, or during childbirth, or even when the paper cut. We need that inflammatory response. And we need the inflammatory response to heal after an injury. But oxidative stress is something else entirely. Oxidative stress just destroys the ability of a cell to do its job. So hormones stop working. So cells stop working. Cell division doesn't go right. DNA gets mutated. Mitochondria cannot work. What is oxidative stress?
Yeah.
It doesn't come from omega-6. It comes from oxygen reacting with polyunsaturated fatty acids. And yes, omega-6s are one of many kinds of polyunsaturated fatty acids in the body. But oxygen reacts with all the others too. And it's not that we have too much omega-6. It's that we have too much polyunsaturated fatty acid. And that creates an unstable state in our metabolism, which is incompatible with normal health and incompatible with normal reproduction. And so we're seeing the ability of the human race to reproduce
diminish,
decline.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm not getting this right, but it sounds like what you're saying is, it's not that these is simplistic enough to say that, oh, there's like an antioxidant in this fat that then creates inflammation in your body. It's more that these lipids, any lipid that you eat, gets incorporated into your cells, into the membranes of your cells. But then if you are having the majority of your fats come from these polyunsaturated fat sources, you literally become more that, in a way that makes you more susceptible to exposure to oxidation when oxygen hits those fats. And so then you literally become the inflammation more than getting exposed to it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, absolutely. That's right. Your own cells become a source of inflammation during stress, during illness, during minor episodes of malnutrition. We literally need more antioxidants in our body than our body can possibly contain in order to be able to control oxidation when our diet contains so much polyunsaturated fatty acid. We cannot possibly keep those reactions from happening when we get more than maybe 10% of our calories from polyunsaturated fatty acids. And right now, some people say we need to dial that way down to like 2%. Maybe 5% at the absolute most. Historically, it's hard to know, but historically, it looks like 5% is what it was. We now have at least twice as much as that, and we just cannot control oxidation reactions when we have them happening so much more often, because they are chain reactions, like nuclear reactions. They spread like wildfire. It's not like just one reaction is going to be, we have twice as much, it's going to become two. We'll have 1,000 times as much oxidative stress because of the speed at which they spread. So, and that's where the chemistry comes in. You need to understand the chemistry in order to be able to realize that this is a complete disaster for our cells to have oxidative stress in our cell membranes constantly happening.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that I like how you point out that there is some basis for having some in our diet, because sometimes the counterpoint I'll hear is like, well, what about walnuts? There's PUFAs in walnuts. But it's like, if you look at the typical Western diet, it's not that they're eating a ridiculous number of walnuts. It's that, like, it's in breakfast cereals, it's in bread, it's in tortillas, it's in coffee creamers, it's in salad dressings, it's in the dried fruit that you put on your salad. It's in the deli meat that you put on your salad. It's like you could feel like you're eating an almost fat-free diet, and it's in it doesn't, nothing looks like fat. It just looks like a Snackwell's cookie. It's, guess what? It's full of vegetable seed oils. So it's like an insidious thing that I think, one, people don't realize is a problem, and two, they just have no idea how much they're eating. But what do you think?
Right. Absolutely. And so the fact that these oils are processed and refined is something else that we haven't talked about, but that matters. So like, you could take away all the walnuts in the world and, a disease wouldn't get better. No diseases would get better. It's certainly not from walnuts or from the sunflower seeds or, anything that is a whole food.
Unless it's roasted in soybean oil, but yeah.
Right. So the vegetable oils that are processed and refined, because during these processing and refining stages in the factory, they remove the antioxidants and most of the nutrition, if not all of the nutrition. In some cases, there's different steps for different oils. But so the not only are these PUFAs devoid, not only are these PUFAs requiring more oxidation protection, more vitamins, when we eat them, we don't get any of those protective nutrients. But
they crowd out the very things that they create need for. Yeah.
Exactly. Which is how they deteriorate into toxins when we cook with them. And that's why it's not just that we're eating PUFA, it's that we're actually eating toxic stuff if we cook with PUFA. Right? I mean, it's like, you're laughing, but it's insane.
It is insane.
The American Heart Association is out there telling people to eat canola oil and eat soy oil, when chemists who study this stuff so that the factory can do their best to produce food that doesn't make people drop dead are saying this is not healthy. It contains these toxins. And the powers that be that educate physicians, that doctors still believe, because there's no other authority to look up to right now, are forced to comply with what the American Heart Association has been telling them and educating all the dietitians they work with.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
It's topsy-turvy.
It absolutely is. I mean, this is just, I think it's exciting to hear your perspective on this, because I think that it's not heard enough. And it seems like now there's more than ever just a lot of extreme. It's almost like, I feel like there was, maybe what I'm trying to say is, I felt like the ancestral movement happened maybe about 10 years ago, where there were flaws in, like, probably the most common, like, frameworks that people were hearing and implementing, but at least it was progress, I think, for people. But now it seems like the whole thing is just shifted dramatically away from it, in the way that nutrition trends do. So I'm just thankful for the fact that you have remained steadfast in truth and continued to push it, whether it's trendy or not, because I think that's really what the world needs. And I'm sure that people are really excited to hear more about the details of everything you have to share. And so maybe you can tell people a little bit about like where they can learn more about the things you're talking about, and where they can maybe get in touch with you if they're interested in getting some help.
Absolutely. Thank you, Erin, for all those nice things that you said.
Yeah, I mean it.
Thank you. So please come to my website, which is drcate.com, drcate.com, and become a subscriber. When you do, you'll get a lot of free resources, downloadable PDFs that will help you get started eating a more human diet, ancestral diet, get some basic ideas of what you can eat and some real simple things too. Like it doesn't have to be like you're cooking every single meal. You can just throw together some. So I mean, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich is pretty not super far off, right? If you can even use sprouted grain bread. You can use peanut butter that's natural rather than got added sugar and stuff, and low sugar jelly. It's way healthier than going through a drive-through, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't have to be that you're like making bone broth from scratch every day where you ferment kimchi like around the clock.
Yes, although I have a lot of people who've like started doing that.
I was gonna say, although that is my dream life.
Do it. Yeah, right. Like a lot of people who are retired. They're like,
Yeah,
well,
yeah, exactly.
why not? It's cheaper. Let me try. Let me give it a go.
When I retire, that's gonna be like my life. Awesome. So
But
it sounds like
yeah,
people can get some free resources. They can check out your books, which again I highly recommend, as some of my top favorite books of all time. And then it sounds like people also can request to work with you directly. Is that true?
yeah. So for a lot of folks who've read the books and they just need to understand more, like how does this apply to them, or how do they get started, or if they have really any questions that are not answered, by their doctor, I can help with that. I'm a family medicine doctor. I have 20 plus years of experience. There's a lot of people with gut problems that the issue is really something so simple that, I can help them get that sorted out, and you don't even need any supplements. It's really just a change in bowel habits, believe it or not, that helps like probably 80% of women with chronic bloating. It's crazy how common this issue is. But
Yeah.
so all kinds of stuff. I love just helping people turn their health around. And I'd say probably 90 out of 100, 95 out of 100 times, it's people are like, wow, I wish I did this 20 years ago, because you really have. Sometimes their issues are complicated and we have to, go back and forth a lot of times. But in the end, you learn a lot more about your body, even if you don't feel 100% better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the fact that you're nutrition centric, I think it's around the most common problem I see, in the sense of like if you're even in a functional medicine world, if you're trying to mask things with supplements or with fancy like IV saunas or whatever. I'm not saying saunas are a bad thing, but if someone's not nourished, which most people aren't, you don't have the basic machinery there to even be well. So creating the environment for wellness and taking stuff to make you well is only going to go so far if you literally are trying to build a brick house without bricks. Like people need nutrition,
Right,
So
exactly.
yeah. Well, Dr. Cate, you're amazing. I know that you probably have to jump off in a minute or two, but we will absolutely put your website in the show notes. And I know people can't wait to get in touch with you and see your resources and check out your books. And I know that you also have another book coming out soon. Is that correct?
Yes, I do. It's available on Amazon for pre-order already. It's called Dark Calories.
I'm
So
over
you can stick
here.
it in
Add to
there.
cart, add to cart, add to cart. Dark calories.
Yeah, stick it in there. Yeah, Dark Calories. And it's different than everything we discussed, but it's really gives a big picture of how medicine could be different and the world could be different if we just got rid of these vegetable oils and the idea that sells vegetable oils, which has to do with cholesterol.
Obsessed. I can't wait to read it. Thank you, Dr. Cate. I can't wait for people to hear this information. And it was really just such an honor to have you on the show.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun talking to you, and keep up the great work that you're doing with your business. I'm
Same.
very
Thank you
impressed.
so much. Talk to you soon.